I acknowledge that I'm hosting this session from the lands of the Darug people of the Eora Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all joining us from today. I pay my respects to the elders past and present. For those who are not Australians, that is how we start our meetings very often in Australia, to acknowledge that we are on lands that belong to other people, and we respect that. So, next slide, please, Thomas. Yes, so I'm Asha Murphy, and I'm the founder of Edify Proprietary Limited, which is a company that I founded after I retired as a teacher. So when I was in the classroom, I got very frustrated by the fact that we were doing a kind of ticker box sort of method, and a lot of the children were falling through the gaps. So when I retired, I started this company, and the idea is to edify through education. And I know that when you give children the opportunity to get an education, like truly quality education, it uplifts them and their communities. I also did my master's in educational studies with a focus on neuroeducation. So a lot of the Edify programs are based on that research, which we apply to our programs as well. And now I'd like to, next slide, please, Thomas. I'd like to just a little bit of a housekeeping. So this event will be recorded, and please make sure you mute yourself. And if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. And enjoy. That's the main rule of the day. Thank you. And next slide, please. Okay. That was an overview of what you will hear today. And I now want to introduce Sukanya Narayan, our facilitator for the session. Sukanya is the founder of the impact strategy firm Sustain Innovate, anchoring actions for systems change for SDGs through capacity building, fundraising, and action-oriented research and advocacy for organizations like SEWA and Catalyst 2030. Currently, she is working closely with the education issues-based group at Catalyst 2030 on an action research project to identify and advocate for innovative collaborative learning solutions that are shaping the new education paradigm. And now I invite Sukanya to introduce the rest of the panel. Over to you, Sukanya.
Thank you, Asha, for the kind introduction. And good morning, good evening, close to good midnight, everybody who has joined us today. I feel incredibly delighted to be here today among such inspiring panelists that we have. And without further ado, I'd just like to introduce all the panelists that we have today, starting from Professor Amy Cutter-McKenzie-Knowles. Professor Amy is a professor of sustainability, environment, and education at Southern Cross University. She's the executive dean of the Faculty of Education, as well as the research leader of Sustainability, Environment, and Arts in Education Research Cluster. She has been recognized for both her teaching and research excellence in environmental education, including the Australian Association for Environmental Education Fellowship, equivalent to a Life Achievement Award, for her outstanding contribution to environmental education research. It's great to have you with us today, Amy. Moving on to our second panelist, we have Simran Mulchandani and Karishma Menon joining us from Project Rangeet. Simran is the CEO, founder of Rangeet, and direction of Generation Blue, a company whose mission is to catalyze regenerative economy. Simran works closely with the curriculum team at Rangeet on the ecology umbrella and is building the next generation Rangeet app. Karishma is the director at Rangeet and works on the confluence of music, design, education, and technology. Our last panelist for the day today is Ben Owens, the co-author of the book Open Up Education and the co-founder of Open Way Learning, a nonprofit organization that helps schools co-design systemic conditions that enable authentic learner-centered strategies to thrive. Through his transformational work in the sector in the 11 years of teaching span, Ben has been recognized as the 2017 Bridging the Gap Distinguished Teacher in STEM Education, the 2016 Science Maths Technology Center's Outstanding 9 to 16 Educator, and a Hope Street Group National Teaching Fellow. Thank you to each of you for joining us today and making this truly a democratic platform in terms of how we can learn from each other with respect to the tools that we have to have a mission-based approach to the global rules for the children who are going to be the future change makers. I think one of the panelists that we had, Emmer, has unfortunately been unable to join us today because of certain unforeseen circumstances. But she is the founder and the program lead for Designathon Works, an incredible venture integrating the design thinking pedagogy for the global goals. And she has shared with us a video of her work, which we would definitely very much like to share with you in the course of the session today. Before we come to, as all the participants here are waiting to listen from each of our panelists on the how we do this integration of pedagogies, I think what we would like to start really with is addressing a common question to each of the panelists that we have today, a common thread across their work, children. So our question, my question to each of you today is, what is the role that you see children playing in solving issues related to global goals? Participants are also welcome to answer these questions in comments, but we will go to the panelists now. Starting with you, Professor Amy.
Thank you very much. I just need you to stop sharing so I can share, if that's okay. Thank you. Hang on a moment. Nice to see you all. It's very late in Australia. It's a little after midnight at the moment, so forgive me if I'm slightly weary. It's been a long day. So you can see that okay?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, well, I'll get started straight away. Akin to Asha, I would also like to pay my respects to the present, past, emerging and future elders and Indigenous peoples in the room today. I acknowledge that the land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also acknowledge that it's just ticked over to midnight, but today was Australia Day in Australia. I don't celebrate that day out of respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as it's a day referred to as Invasion Day, and it's of great sorrow and mourning for Aboriginal peoples. So the project I'll be speaking about today is an app in particular, but it is part of a larger project, and it's called the Climate Change in Me Research Program. And these are some of the key researchers on the team. But in order to contextualize the app project I'm going to talk about, I just want you to think about quickly and put a few comments in the chat in terms of what you think we know about children and young people's climate change voices. So what do you think their thoughts, ideas, beliefs, knowledge and concerns are? So just a few ideas in the chat there, and we'll keep moving, but I will come back to it. But what does research tell us about young people's thinking and beliefs and values in climate change? It's quite interesting, and Dr. David Russell and I did a systematic review, literature review of climate change education, as well as children and climate change. And what we found is that on the most part, it tended to portray children's understandings as limited, erroneous, and highly influenced by the mass media. And I'm going to come back to that as well. Of the studies we looked at, there were over 200, noting that the bulk were from the United States, around 77. In Australia at the time, there were only about a dozen, and in the Asia Pacific area, although I acknowledge that that's very much increasing rapidly and so we need to do another systematic review. But the bulk of that literature, actually what it focused on, is more around what children and young people don't know rather than what they do know. And a particular focus on their knowledge of climate change science. So you can see the distribution a little bit there. So with regards to the United States, and the circles represent the size of research that's been undertaken. And I've published this elsewhere, so you can check it out if you like. But what we also found was a real trend around taken for granted voices. And what I mean by that is particularly children and young people, where they're positioned as experts of their own lives rather than objects of research who are surveyed and so forth. So when we commenced the Climate Change and Me research program, it was pivotal that the research methodology was very much child framed. And so children have been working alongside us as researchers. Now, the Climate Change and Me research programs has many projects in it. I'm going to talk briefly about the original project, but only very briefly, and then jump straight into the app. So this was the original project, and it involved 135 children and young people. We worked with them over 3 years, really in what we called a research co-play space, in order to essentially measure and understand their voices in climate change. And then that resulted in community exhibitions, as well as a Climate Change and Me curriculum, which you can obtain from the website, and we co-wrote it with them, meaning with the children and young people and teachers, as well as we created a Climate Change and Me youth network, which is still very much going, and we had a Climate Change and Me dialogue. Now, what I mean by the climate change or climate child research spaces is where children are very much positioned as researchers, and positioned as researchers over quite a period of time. And we did this using iPads and different technologies. And in this video here, which I won't show because I don't have a lot of time, but a child is interviewing a tree about their thoughts on climate change. And the point is that children tend to always push the boundaries in thinking about climate change as not just as a human issue, but it's a more than human issue. And so taking research into interesting spaces and places. And out of that research, and I want to particularly focus on this, is one researcher wrote a speculative fiction called The Beginning of the Change. And the reason I'm sharing this is because it then led to the development of a climate change profiler. And that survey link, you can do that, and it will tell you what your climate change avatar is. And it's used in many schools across Australia and internationally now. And these are the different avatar programs. So Shunden's dismissive or doubtful, maybe unaware or don't care. And that all came from the speculative fiction, which the children and young people wanted to utilize in this personality profiler. And then you can see here, Albereth, worried or concerned, and Aoi, hopeful, informed or positive. And we've now had over 10,000 people complete this. And we find the bulk are Albereth, worried or concerned. But we do find a lot as well in Aoi. And we also find that it more tends to be adults who are Shunden or maybe, not young people. So the Climate Change and Me app project, that led on from the original project, and the intent was to co-design an app together that could act as something where it gathers people, specifically children and young people. We used a workshop design. So we had 6 workshops that snowballed on one another. And so what that means, it was a design process where we worked very closely, originally in unpacking all of the first project data, as well as climate change science, and then went through a design process. Our research question was this, is how can we develop focused creative solutions that will have significant value for children and young people's climate change education and political engagement. We used Marvel as part of the design process, so that the young people could really mark up what they thought this app would be. And over the course of the 6 workshops, we worked with 39 young people. So you can get a bit of a sense here of what they looked like. And some of the things that they said in terms of what they wanted the app to do was really quite fascinating. So they said things like, they wanted the feeling of being suspended in a kind of airship while receiving continuous updates of climate data. They wanted to be able to travel to different parts of the world to encounter the specific impacts of climate change. They wanted a hangout space. They wanted the creation of mixed reality and getting into different fictions. They wanted to be able to take the pulse of global youth climate activism, crowdsourcing, and they wanted some kind of experience as well. So you can go to the app here. It's only a web app at this point because this was a pilot project. And I'm just going to share you a brief video.
Hi, we're Aoi and Elbereth, and we've got an important secret to share.
Recently, we discovered we have superpowers. My mutant hand makes drawings come to life, and Elbereth's blue flame can affect the hearts and minds of people.
What's useful powers for creating positive change in our world? Guess what? We've decided to use these powers together to fight climate change. And now you can join us too.
Jump in and explore the Climate Change Campus, where we've created a secret underground mission to research and share climate action ideas with the world.
We'd love you to join us using our own climate research shuttle and today's global technologies like social media. So please jump on board with our amazing team of climate researchers, artists and social campaigners today. And find out what you can do to take meaningful action against climate change.
Let's do this!
Hi.
Oh, sorry about that. And that I believe I've only got 10 minutes, so I think that finishes my presentation. Normally I would do a walkthrough of the app as well, but you can go straight to that link and it will allow you to create an account and walk through it. But some of the really exciting things in the app are the cinema. You can post directly to Twitter. You can travel in a spaceship around the world, seeing how climate change is impacting different people, as well as non-human as in addition. A lot of the data from that is also come directly from people all over the world where they submitted their concerns around climate change. But there's heaps of neat features. One of the most exciting is the secret space, where you can deliberately engage in activism and upload different tweets and messages, which, as I said, go direct to Twitter. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Amy, for so descriptively and comprehensively describing the process which got you here, and also giving us a feeling of what it would be to use this app and what these profiles look like. We will be requesting all the participants, if there are any questions, please drop them in the comment box. In the meanwhile, I think a question that we had beforehand, I'll just start with that so that we get that going. In this whole process, Professor Amy, how did you see the collaboration aspect work out? Because when we talk about global goals, we always talk about it's an ecosystem approach. So even when it's a climate change aspect, we talk about it from a very interdisciplinary perspective. So you have to work with multiple stakeholders. So how do you see that panning out for this app?
Well, it was pretty easy actually, because we essentially put young people in the driver's seat, and then we brought other expertise to them. So, and that really does change the power dynamic in that sense. So in the workshops, the children and young people worked with a developer called Matt Cummings. So he was part of the project as well. So he specifically helped with coding and things like this, but we also had in there access to artists, climate scientists, media specialists, but again, they were in the driver's seat. But when we did that though, we had to make them fully aware of, well, what are the resources that we have? And they were very active too in bringing those resources to the team. They certainly weren't shy about it.
Thank you, Professor Amy. I think we have a question from Anthony. How does the app and the data work backwards upstream to the social drivers of climate change? For example, fossil fuel lobbies, funding from grey money, or politicians captured by the industry?
Well, because we came from the point of view of the children and young people wanting to design an app for children and young people, it comes from a position of activism. So it comes from a position of climate change absolutely exists. So in that sense, they're really talking to them, not, I mean, of course, with them as well through platforms like Twitter. But I remember early on in the process, in the design process, they had fantastic ideas too around wanting like this kind of political aspect. Well, and it does have lots of political aspect, but very direct, involving our Prime Minister, and you know, you'd get so many points if you did a ScoMo, because his name's Scott Morrison. And so, you know, they had fun with it. But reading your question further, because you said, how does the app and the data work backwards and upstream to the social drivers? Well, aren't children and young people social drivers? They do make up a quarter to a third of the world. So I'd put that back on you as well. You know, they're a driving force in and of themselves. I mean, just look at the youth climate change strikes all over the world. Sometimes, honestly, you can't have a balanced conversation with politicians, as we all know, in this climate change world, and it takes two to come to the table. So that's my point of view.
No, agree. And I think, Professor Amy, you answered the question also that we asked in a way through your entire project, that what role do we see children in the global roles? They are going to be the drivers. They are going to be the leaders. They are going to be the ones at the forefront, influencing all the social drivers that we talk about, making the global goals a reality. If we do not have any other questions, I think we'll circle back to the same question for other panelists now. Could we share the screen with the question? Okay. Thank you, Thomas. So we're going to circle back to this question for both Simran Mulchandani, Karishma Menon, and also Ben Owens. I think what we expected right at the outset was an answer also in one or two sentences, what this role would look like, and then we would move on to individually talking about the projects that we really, really want to hear about, just like Amy described right now. So Simran, over to you.
Are we starting just now?
Yes. Could you answer to this question? Yeah.
Oh, first, okay, sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. So yeah, I mean, I just think the primary role does lie with educators to empower the children and ensure that children are getting personalized education that is recognizing each of their strengths. But then, if they get the right education, it's every child's responsibility to take action and be accountable. And we'll talk about that in our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Simran. Ben, over to you.
Yeah, I think what Amy shared was just a perfect example of what we can have students do is ask them to, at very minimum, co-design, if not lead, the change that we want to see, because we as adults often get hung up in the minutia, and children have a really beautiful way of clearing through that. And I love the example of a student interviewing a tree. That's so brilliant, and I think it just points to what we can learn from our young people.
Thank you, Ben. Karishma, do you want to add anything?
Just sort of taking taking bits of what everyone is saying. Knowledge is power, right? And I think as adults, it's upon us to have really honest conversations with kids, because you know, very often we're surprised by the answers you get, and you know, discussions around topics that are typically taboo, especially from countries like where I'm from, India, where people don't discuss mental health. People don't discuss things like good touch, bad touch. But if we equip kids with, with knowledge and give them the information that they are seeking, they'll go on to solve many world issues that we've not been able to leading up to now.
Thank you, Karishma, and also for opening the road to your project now. I think Project Rangeet, we can now talk about that. How do you really integrate the SEL pedagogy to make things take that lead?
Perfect.
You.
Thank you very much. So a Rangeet lesson is active, engaging, meaningful, socially interactive, iterative, and joyful. It involves a lot of immersion and fun, where everyone takes part in the activities, experiments, songs, storytelling, and games, whether it's a teacher or a facilitator or the child. So before we get into the presentation, we're going to give you a glimpse into a Rangeet session. May I request you to stop sharing the screen so people can see what I'm doing? Thank you very much. So the first activity we'll conduct...
And I will share my screen, so you don't have to worry about it.
So the first activity we'll conduct is called a Play-Doh activity, which is the name of which is We're All Made of the Same Stuff, which is from our society umbrella, and we'll go on to explain our umbrellas in a little while. And since I don't have a bunch of kids to do this activity with me, I'll sort of play the role of facilitator and all the kids. So what a teacher does in a classroom is hands a piece of plain white Play-Doh to each child and ask them to make a shape out of it. So I'm just going to make a circle out of my shape of Play-Doh, and just as examples, imagine a classroom where children have made different shapes. As you can see, I have different shapes, I have different sizes, but the one thing that's the same is that they're all plain white pieces of Play-Doh. Let's add some color to this Play-Doh, and I'm going to pick a red color and I'm going to mush it into my white ball, and I mean, imagine a classroom of kids doing this. Who doesn't like to get their hands messy? Imagine the giggles and laughter in a classroom. And now the teacher will ask the kids to hold up all their colored pieces of Play-Doh. And I have some more examples over here of colored pieces of Play-Doh. What has changed? So my pieces of Play-Doh are no longer white, but they're a rainbow of colors. And these colored pieces of Play-Doh are essentially each one of us. We're all different colors. We speak different languages, eat different foods, follow different religions, even live in different parts of the world. But we're all essentially that white piece of Play-Doh on the inside. We're all made of the same stuff. And that's what matters and unites us. Our differences don't really matter. So Simran, over to you while I just get my hands clean. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have screen sharing rights. If someone could please grant me the ability to share my screen, please.
I think you need to make Simran co-host.
Got it. All right. Can you see my screen, guys?
Yes.
Can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. So thanks, Karishma. So Karishma and I are the co-founders of Rangeet. It's based in Mumbai, India. And Karishma, over to you.
Thank you. So Albert Einstein said, everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. I was that fish in school. I felt judged based on my inability to cope academically. And in a classroom of friends, I was lost and alone. To this day, I'm scarred with feelings of inadequacy. This is what my inequitable classroom left me with. And I co-founded Rangeet to fill children with hope, children like 13-year-old me. The 60 skills are a departure from what school has looked like for centuries. But where we need to go now is where we began. For hundreds and thousands of years, starting with the hunter-gatherers, learning happened through play and exploration. This changed in the agricultural and industrial ages, where children were trained for and forced into subjugation. Schools as we know them were developed as industrial conveyor belts, focusing on rote learning, churning out students with no attention to personal growth. Curriculums change from system to system and country to country. But the science of learning tells us that children learn best through play, and that the 60 skills and socio-emotional competencies is the foundation that children need to become better learners, carers, and leaders, regardless of academic system or curriculum. Humans are amazing. In 1962, US President John F. Kennedy proclaimed that as a species, we choose to go to the moon. And in 7 years, this dream was realized. But 50 years later, armed with the science of learning and an understanding of how children learn best, we haven't achieved an education moonshot everywhere, and learners continue to struggle.
Now we're faced with an even greater challenge, right? COVID has changed our world. It's impacted the lives of billions of children, teachers, parents, caregivers all around the world. Enrolled students are facing critical learning loss. Many lost access to education. Others didn't have access to education to begin with. And deeper problems are prevalent as a result of the pandemic. There's isolation, anxiety, a lack of empathy, loss of primary caregivers, right? Children are re-entering school angry, anxious, and scared. There is a growing climate change-related anxiety amongst children. The World Bank estimates that the impact of COVID is going to represent a $10 trillion loss of lifetime earnings. And experts state, and this comes from Andreas Schleicher of the OECD, that before children are, or parents or teachers are able to learn and teach and participate in the teaching learning process, they need to be ready. We've been locked up for 2 years. And so essentially, what do we do with this backdrop? This backdrop of how we feel education has lost its way, how we feel the problem has been exacerbated. This gulf, this inequity in education has just been growing. We have a wonderful piece from Rebecca Winthrop from Brookings Institution that talks about the fact that there's 100 years gap between the haves and the have-nots. So what do we do to try and achieve that? So at Rangeet, we support educators with a learning framework that helps children become better lifelong learners and the global stewards of tomorrow. We don't replace any curriculum anywhere, but we actually support it through teachers. So we do this with this app that supports the facilitators. The app features a social, emotional, and ecological knowledge. So many of you are familiar with the concept of SEL, social emotional learning. We believe that there is an inextricable link between climate and well-being, and so a very big part of what Rangeet does is include ecological education to build that agency amongst children. And yes, we do teach in the way different brains think and learn. Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. So we're based on developing socio-emotional competencies. We're based on the multiple intelligences. We can be taught anywhere, anytime, in any language. And only one device is needed to teach a Rangeet class.
As Simran said, at Rangeet, we connect the common strand of empathy for self with those around us in our societies, and to all life on Earth in our ecological systems. So we have 3 learning umbrellas, and we believe that it is very important for children to learn to be empathetic towards their own bodies and minds in order for them to be empathetic to those around them and by extension the planet. Our mindfulness umbrella, of course, talks about the importance of living in the moment and helps kids to sift through all the clutter that might be going on so that they can understand their thoughts, feelings, emotions. We also equip them with tools that will help them later on in life, like growth mindset and resilience. And most importantly, the beauty in making mistakes and how much there is to learn from perceived failure. It's not something to be frowned upon. Health as well, of course, talks about the importance of, physical health, playing outside, eating right. But very importantly, we want to break down the taboo around discussing mental health. If you have a fractured bone, you go to a doctor. So why should your mental health be any different? I'll give you a bit of an example. We want to teach children that there are many different types of emotions. On some days, for example, we're really happy, and those emotions come bubbling to the surface. On some days, we're fine, neither happy nor too sad. And sometimes those emotions come bubbling to the surface. Then there are days when we may be sad, or days when we are extremely sad. And there's really nothing wrong with any of these emotions. We all have them. They're all extremely important. But if these feelings of sadness or extreme sadness go on for prolonged periods of time and our emotions keep bubbling to the surface and getting the better of us, we should ask for help. Asking for help is empowering, and there's nothing wrong in asking for help. Our third module in our self umbrella called You're the Voice talks about the fact that as citizens of a country, we all have rights, and with those rights come responsibilities. We should use our voice for the greater good and use your voice for those who may not have as loud a voice as you. Our society umbrella rests on the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We talk about different types of diversity and discrimination kids might have seen. We talk about not bullying one another. And we also talk about gender equity and the role that boys play in the upliftment of women. Our ecology umbrella talks about the tree being the fulcrum of all life on Earth. And chopping down one tree means you're killing an entire life that's linked, a chain of life linked to it. Earth Positive talks about our carbon footprint and all that we can do to combat that carbon footprint. That's our carbon handprint. Nature has no back office. There's no accountant handing out an invoice for every drop of water we drink or every tree we chop down. But if there was, we'd be paying a lot. And Heal Our Planet, which teaches kids how to do things even just sitting in our own homes. And just to quickly explain how our curriculum is structured, I'll give you an example of how a teacher can use our curriculum as we've prescribed it, or to help use as a resource in a core curriculum. If a teacher wants to teach a class of pollution in a science class, here's a picture of a neighborhood that at first glance looks environmentally safe and friendly, but there are hidden culprits which are written at the bottom. Maybe you can send in your answers in the chat if you can help me find some of them. For example, garbage thrown outside the garbage bins. There you go. A man throwing garbage into a lake. Simran, if you can. Yeah, so these are a few of the, a few hidden culprits that kids can find, and this is a really engaging way to teach a science class. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, and like we said, our umbrellas have 3 modules each at the moment. There are 8 to 11 lessons in each module. We prescribe 50 minutes, but a facilitator can teach it in 30 minutes, 20 minutes, use it as a resource, like I just said. And we target primary and middle school children because they're the most receptive to these concepts.
I think we're running out of time, but I'm just going to wrap this up really quickly. So we run on an app. The app enables facilitators. A facilitator can be a 10th grade student. It could be a trained educator to deliver these lessons. It's a detailed lesson plan, but we also include tools to monitor and measure the progress through iterative feedback, through collecting class data, but also doing baseline and endline testing. So I think, Sukanya, I think we're out of time, right?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Okay, cool. So, I mean, that's kind of, I think that kind of wraps up our presentation. So here we go. Go back to you.
I think you can respond more in the questions as well. So opening the floor to the participants as well to type in the questions in the comment box. I guess I can start with a question, and it really comes from a very implementation perspective, because like you mentioned, that this is something, you're not trying to change curriculums. You're trying to empower the educators to use them within their existing curriculums. So how has it been received in the schools that you have worked with, or with the educators and facilitators you have worked with? What have been the challenges in getting this to be part of something which is existing? That would be good to understand.
Yeah. So, I mean, so to address the first part, so yeah, we do not replace curriculum, but the science of learning, as Karishma talked about, is very clear that children, what we need to develop for the future. And that's CASEL research, which is 20 years old. The Future of Jobs report. Brookings Institution came out with a research report last year about play-based learning and the development of 6C skills. So all of this forms kind of like the scaffolding around learning. So teachers use this as a way to engage, students more, to build the skills, to become better learners. Karishma talked to you about herself in the beginning, right? You have many people go to school and they're afraid of math, for example. Maybe they just didn't have one of those 6 C's. They didn't have the confidence. Maybe they just didn't have the most engaging teacher, right? So we are building those frameworks. What has been difficult and how has it been accepted in the classroom? So on one of the slides, which I didn't go through, we've run 40,000 impact tests with 25,000 children. We've done like 500,000 teaching hours in community centers, in schools across India and Bangladesh, in government schools, and we're now engaging with parents to share the teaching learning burden because teachers don't have time. So to really scale this, you've really got to bring parents into the equation, right? How has it been? And so through all the testing and results that we received, we found, much improved attitudes and behavior, much more improved, skills around those 6 C's development, which we test for, much more improved pedagogy. So teachers have filled out forms, talked about how they're able to use Rangeet, like Karishma talked about, in other classes. They're able to solve social issues in their classrooms. For example, in the state of Jharkhand in India, a teacher wrote in through, all of this happens through our app. Teacher wrote in about the fact that she had a blind child in her class and all the kids would make fun of this child. And through Rangeet, through this one activity, the kids realized that what they were doing was wrong. And that gave the teacher the answer to solving the problem. In Bangladesh, we've had teachers writing into us and talking to us about how knowledge about the climate crisis has improved, attitudes towards each other, attitudes to the teacher has improved. And all of them are talking about the fact that we didn't realize that we could talk about empathy through play. We didn't realize we could teach empathy through music. And then iterative feedback is crucial, right? And I'll share one last quick example with you. In the state of West Bengal and Bangladesh, 50 kilometers apart, we have kids in classrooms being taught Rangeet in Bengali, right? But the context in Bangladesh is very different from the context in India, because Bangladesh is a Muslim country. And so when we talked about discrimination, when we talked about discrimination, because we're Indian and we developed this in India, the Bangladeshi kids didn't get it, that they didn't understand the discrimination against a Muslim child. Here's what was great. We collected feedback on the day of the class. We got this feedback, and within a week, we were able to turn around the lesson so that we actually normalized it from their point of view. So that's how we've been doing it. That's how it's been accepted. Sorry, long answer to your question.
Sorry, I was on mute. No, but I'm just saying that's great to hear because that kind of communicates how the learner is at the center of everything that you do. So
it's always the learner. Yeah.
And is there any intention to go beyond India and Bangladesh going
forward?
Yeah.
So we actually have a small group of entrepreneurs working in Peru. They took on the translation into Spanish and the contextualization, and they've been teaching in Lima. We're talking to STIR Education, which is one of India's large educators in Indonesia, the Global Shapers community in Indonesia. So we're looking currently at Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, big, very important markets for us. Indonesia's crucial. Sorry, you had something to say.
No, there's just a question in the chat box, so I didn't want to miss out on that. I think Patrick has asked.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're looking at Southeast Asia. So actually, the short answer is Rangeet can be taught anywhere in any language. So we're happy to work anywhere. It's all about translating and contextualizing, and that can happen in a span of 2 months.
Perfect. I think the chat question is probably, Patrick, it's for Amy to create, or you could take it up as well. Probably, I don't know if this is relevant to Project Rangeet as well. How do we create awareness to open up minds to create interest for the need of climate change?
Create awareness.
How do you integrate the need for climate change action within the context of your project? I'm not sure if this is for you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can answer it because climate action is a huge part of what we do. And like I said, without addressing this impending problem that young minds are concerned about, I don't believe that we're looking after the mental health and well-being of children. And so the SEEK curriculum actually makes that a very big part of it. In our ecology curriculum, we don't sort of tell children what they need to do. So that's one part of it. We talk to them about the importance of biodiversity and the fact that every living being plays a role. And we then talk about the value of ecosystems and ecosystem services. So I bet you that we don't know, like many people don't know about the value of bees and what role bees play in our ecology, or coral reefs, or the Amazon, and what are the exact roles. So learning about that, and then as Karishma said, once you learn about the fact that every living being is important and that it's all interconnected. There's brilliant research out of this Canadian researcher called Suzanne Simard about how trees actually communicate with each other. And through the mycelium network, they're actually rewarding each other for things they do for each other through the exchange of complex carbohydrates. We talk to kids about this, and kids need to learn that there's beauty in nature. There's beauty all around us, and protecting it is not just about protecting that, it's actually protecting our future way of life. And then what can kids do? What's actionable in their lives? Everyone in their homes. And that's sort of the answer to your first question. Once we do that, once we bring these important thoughts into a child's narrative, into their dialogue, then it is up to them to take actions. Then it's up to them. Then they're accountable.
Yeah. Thank you, Simran, and thank you, Karishma, it was experiential for us, seeing it, you demonstrated right in front of us. So thank you for sharing experiences. And I think now we'll quickly move on to Ben, because we've taken a little more time than required. So Ben, over to you. The floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen as well. Get this to work. All right, so you should be seeing the Learning Planet Festival screen.
Yes, we can.
All right, awesome. And by the way, this is in Pear Deck, so I'm going to drop this in the chat as well. I have embedded some links in the presentation, so through the Pear Deck link, you can have access to those links. So good morning or afternoon or time appropriate greetings to everyone. It's morning for me in Asheville, North Carolina, where I'm presenting from here in the United States. I'm delighted to be here. So without further ado, I'm going to move into my presentation. So I'm Ben Owens. I'm a former engineer who then became a public school teacher for 11 years at a wall-to-wall project-based learning school. And then in 2018 left the classroom to form a nonprofit called Open Way Learning. And just real quickly, Open Way Learning, we operate under the premise that you can do authentic innovation, but only after you focus on what we call the cultural or system level stuff first, which includes a living mission and vision, understanding your why as a learning organization, embodying this idea of collective leadership, collective autonomy, which very much includes students being involved in that voice and agency and co-design of learning. And I'm delighted that my previous panelists brought that to fruition in the examples that they highlighted. This default to radical collaboration, where whatever we're doing it in a collaborative manner. That then leads to what we call open source sharing. So taking advantage of the principles of the open source movement of transparency, community, collaboration, adaptability, and inclusivity. And again, our premise is when you do that, that will then enable you to do the learner-centered innovations that have been highlighted today, do them with fidelity and sustain them over the long term. So when we talk about project-based learning, or social emotional learning, game-based learning, STEM, maker spaces, whatever innovation, that can be done well, but only after we attend to the cultural issues. So that's the focus of our nonprofit that when we work with schools and learning organizations particularly around the US, but that is growing globally as we speak. And one of the things that we try to do in the work is really dig into this notion of using the design process. And again, as has been highlighted already in the panel today, starting with empathy, really understanding the local context. So as an engineer, I use the design process more on processes and equipment, but I found that the most powerful way to use the design process was in the classroom, working with students, understanding their perspectives, understanding what assets they brought to the classroom, and then using those ideas, using their perspective, using what's relevant to their lives to affect the types of changes and lessons and projects that we were working on. And one of the key points of the design process is when we focus on empathy first, that then we can really define whatever problem or solution we want to focus on in that perspective, as opposed to assuming that we've already got the solutions in this top-down hierarchical type of environment that we've tended to use. So it becomes much more powerful, starting with empathy, defining our problems, ideating from that perspective, and then prototyping, fast prototyping, learning forward as we move into creating these learner-centered environments, and then testing what we do with users' input, and in this case, the user primarily being students. So that's the focus of the work that I have been privileged to do, not only in the classroom, but now as I work with schools around the US primarily. And so I want to start with a short exercise, and this is a thought process. I want you to think about, if you were to interview a group of students, either in a focus group or with a survey or something, think about one particular student in mind, one student that may be furthest from opportunity. What would they say, think, do, and feel relative to their current school experience? Just think for a moment about that. And you're welcome to drop anything in the chat, but just really want you to just engage in putting yourself in that student perspective at this point. Because what I want you to do is kind of create this idea of the current state. And it doesn't necessarily need to infer that it's all going to be bad, but I would certainly contend that it can be improved. And as we have highlighted so far, there are inequities that do exist in our current education systems, And it's really good if we are going to address those to start with the empathy, start with the student perspective. Another way that I like to encourage folks to think about empathy is not only start with the current state in something like a focus group, as I just used in that last example, but actually project yourself in the future. And this can be done either independently, again, in a focus group, and ideally with students. And so think about, in this context, project yourself into the future. And this is actually a future protocol that's from the School Reform Initiative, excuse me. What skills, knowledge, and dispositions do our students have if we were to project ourselves to 2027? Think for a moment, what would those be? What would our students say that their skills, knowledge, and dispositions would be at that point in the future, or as we think about it in the future? And again, this is another tool that you can use to really build the empathy. And then from that, begin to think about solutions that are focused on addressing those issues. And I would contend that obviously if we did this with more time, that we could come up with some of the items that have already been mentioned in the panel today: the collaboration, the creative problem solving, the ability to network with others, understanding empathy of others. All of these types of skills are things that obviously we need to be emphasizing as we are clearly in the fourth industrial revolution. And if we look at from a traditional education perspective, may not be the ones that are being emphasized as much. So in that situation, what I've tried to do by going through these exercises is point a picture between the current state of where we are, wherever we are on this planet, and what could be, what is the possibility. And I'm referring in this case to something I call creative tension, which is something that Peter Senge out of MIT refers to. And that creative tension is the gap between our current state and where we want to be. And with that gap, it gives us the intention and the action to actually move forward towards this vision. So having a gap isn't necessarily all bad. Obviously, we want to do something about it, but the creative tension and the ability to project ourselves in the future like we just did, particularly when we involve students in that process, creates the energy that we can then follow through, the action that we want to take. So everything we have done to this point is using that design process focused on empathy. And what I now want to do is paint a picture of what is possible. So I'm going to give you a moment just to look at these images. And these are either from my former school or from schools that I've had the privilege of working with. And I want you to just think about using a protocol called See, Think, and Wonder, which is out of Harvard's Project Zero. And again, if we had more time, we would actually go through and process this in more detail. But I want to cue this up so that you can perhaps use this in the future. What do you currently see in these images? What does it make you think about? And then what questions do you have based on what you're seeing? The thoughts that you have, what questions does that invoke? What challenges does that produce? So obviously these are images of experiential learning. Again, from various schools, mostly around the US, although there are some exceptions, this school in Cambodia that's here. And in this experiential learning focus, one of the particular items I want to highlight is all of the images you were looking at could be identified as having the characteristics of what we call high quality project-based learning, or HQPBL. And this, I would contend, is one of the ways that we can close this creative tension gap. By moving from a traditional hierarchical, siloed, abstract learning environment to ones that are more focused on allowing students to experience and create the change that they want to see in the world, that students can become difference makers. And we do that through the HQPBL process, which has 6 key components. One is intellectual challenge and accomplishment. where students are held to high expectations, but given the scaffolds, given the supports then to meet those. And when they meet them, have that sense of accomplishment. And that's particularly important for our marginalized students, our students who have traditionally been furthest from opportunity, is to give that sense of empowerment again, and so that they can see that they are indeed making a difference. Another characteristic is authenticity, as you noticed in the mural that I just showed there, was this is authentic learning. Students aren't just sitting and doing abstract worksheets, but they're actually learning by doing, constructing their learning. That most of the time the work is having a public product, either in an exhibition at the end of the project or activity or challenge, but also during the process where they're working with experts from the community. A sense of collaboration, as emphasized before, that students are working together, sharing their ideas with one another, leveraging the respective assets. Managing the process as well. So students are learning these abilities to manage time, manage resources, manage conflict even, if they wouldn't necessarily get along with some of their teammates. And then giving that time for students to reflect on their learning. As John Dewey said, we don't necessarily learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So that's the core elements of what we call high quality PBL. And again, I want you to think now, if we look at this example again, this mosaic, do you see images of possibility there? Whoops, slides went a bit too far. So do you see those elements? Do you see collaboration? Do you see project management? Do you see reflection? Do you see this sense of accomplishment? And I would submit that you do. The next thing I want to point out is when we use this approach of authentic, high quality project-based learning or experiential learning, we have the opportunity to allow students to be difference makers so that they can begin to change the world. They can begin to address climate change, as what was emphasized before, address poverty, address pollution, address inequity. So I would again ask, do you notice things where students are being innovative and where they're possibly developing ways that they can be difference makers today? And finally, I would point out one of the design process that I showed earlier is that they were, what the design process is actually a bit dated. There's a new version of this called liberatory design, where we really take time to notice our own biases, notice our own inequities in the systems that we work with, and also reflect on what we can do to drive action. So that's one of the things that I would also point out, that when we do this process of experiential learning, we allow our students to also become advocates in that process. So thank you. I'm going to close out with this provocative questions, and this is a call to action, is how will you use things like high quality project-based learning, use the design process, liberatory design, and allow our students to close the sustainability gap, the opportunity gap, and the equity gap? That's the question I would have for you. So thank you very much. And I'll now turn it back over to Shikana and see if I've got any questions.
Thank you, Ben. So a couple of questions from me for sure, and we are expecting questions in the chat box if they come in the meanwhile. So one thing, because what I understood was, because you mentioned you work with various schools, is it in class or is it also outside school, an intervention that can happen outside school as well?
Yes, I would say it happens both. There's a couple examples where we have worked with schools in after-school environments or in summer environments where students are not necessarily in school. And doing these experiential learning processes or activities, projects, allows teachers to work side by side with the student and see in a less high stakes environment how this actually worked, how it engages students, how they see the interdisciplinary learning take place, And that then informs the teacher, the educator, how they can go back into their classroom, into their schools, and make those cultural level adjustments, the systemic adjustments, so that this then becomes more of a point of emphasis. And the cool thing is the students help drive that, because the students, they have become excited about the work that they're doing. So they see a new way of learning. They see that, hey, I'm actually learning these traditional math, languages, social studies, these types of things, but I'm seeing it in a different context than what I'm typically used to. And that's exciting for them and obviously for the educator. So it helps drive and catalyze the change.
Yeah, and as open way learning, the point of intervention really is to empower the educators to create the space, right?
It is, yes. And obviously when we can work with students, that is always a bonus for us. But our primary point is to focus on working with the educators, because they are the ones who typically are in control of the systems that sometimes encumber our teachers or our students to really be their best selves, to make the types of differences that we know are possible. So it's that sort of systemic cultural level focus that we try to emphasize. And so yes, you can do things like, high quality project-based learning, but if you don't address the cultural issues first, which are often in the control of the administration or the teachers or whomever else, so sometimes the community members, boards of education, etc., then it really limits those possibilities. So our focus is, yes, let's have those harder cultural conversations that then can help make some of these innovations really happen.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I don't think we have any questions from the participants. I think they understood it quite well. I think I'll just ask one last question from an ecosystem perspective, because you work a lot with the local learning ecosystem. So who are the stakeholders, apart from the educators and the students that you work with, who you feel are very, very critical for something like this pedagogy per se, the project-based learning? Which other stakeholders can play a huge role here?
Yes, I would say one of the stakeholders that we always try to work with is enabling communication with local partners. They could be local community organizations, they could be businesses, nonprofits, any organization in the larger community that is supported and supports the local schools. Because many times we see that those levels of communication aren't there, or the only time that the community comes in is for the traditional, the fireman comes in and explains what a fireman does, et cetera, as opposed to the fire department coming in and saying, these are the issues that we're dealing with, that we're not able to solve. And sometimes we say that, well, we don't want the students to be working necessarily on the top 5 problems. You've probably got those figured out, but let's focus on 6 through 10 and allow that as a way that students can begin the process. And then the community partners see, wow, these students are coming up with these brilliant ideas. That then provides the impetus and accelerates the process where those communication pieces are happening in a much more meaningful way. And it de-silos the process, and it breaks down the traditional walls that sometimes we see between schools and communities.
Last question for you, Ben. I think Silk has asked, how do you get into schools? Are you invited by teachers? How does the work?
Yeah, I mean, we are a relatively small not-for-profit organization, so we don't have a huge marketing presence as it were, but we try to work by word of mouth. We focus on working with a small number of schools and districts and doing it really, really well, as opposed to trying to solve all the world's problems. We also partner very much with other like-minded organizations, particularly nonprofits, because we try, and that's why we're open source. Everything that we develop, we share with others under this premise that it helps all boats rise, as opposed to trying to compete with others, which I think is, in the education space, is a little bit worrisome.
I think Jack has answered for you. People like him reach out to you.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I have the privilege of working with Jack with his wonderful organization up in Cohasset, Massachusetts, that has students actually working, making environmental difference today. It's a brilliant organization. So thank you, Jack, for that comment.
Thank you so much, Ben, for answering all our questions. I think we're just going to now move, even though Emma is not here, we would definitely like to show the video that she has shared with us, because I think she takes it further, the design thinking, the integration of design thinking as a pedagogy for global goals. So I would just request to share that video so that we all can understand what Designathon does. Okay.
We wanted to invent something that works with nature instead of using it up.
Belangrijk dat we wel, als we energie gebruiken, dat we bewust zijn van dat we eigenlijk ook energie gebruiken voor grotendeels energie die niet goed is voor de aarde.
Unfortunately, we can't take any questions on behalf of MR, but if anybody has any questions, wants to get connected to her, we can do the same. You can reach out to us and we can facilitate that link. Now I'd just like to hand over to Asha, because she has already shared the new game-based global goals challenge playbook with all the participants who had registered. So Asha, if you could just take over and introduce us to this playbook and also the SDG Shuffle initiative that you wanted to talk about.
Thanks, Sukanya. So Thomas, if you could share the slides. Thank you. Yes, so this is the playbook that those of you who have registered through Humanitix would have downloaded, and if you haven't, please do. So you've had some really good, actually amazing, speakers today, and so next slide, please, Thomas. And I strongly recommend that you implement these in your classroom. So please get in touch with the speakers and find out more about it, and we encourage you to actually implement this in their classrooms, because it will make such a big difference. So what we want to do as well is talk a little bit about the SDGs that most of the speakers have mentioned. And now, we have these term Sustainable Development Goals, and these are the reasons behind it. But in most schools, they actually address them, but they talk about them as global goals or sustainable goals. They might not use the term SDGs. And so it's important that this is known. This is becoming more and more in the vocabulary of educators. And so, and it should be passed on to the students as well. So talking about SDGs is important in the classroom. And in the next slide, we also have, we very much use these 21st century skills, that's talked about in classrooms, and these are the 7 C's. But what we say is that what we really need too is an 8th C. And next slide, please, Thomas. And the 8th C is caring. So what we want to say is, the 7 C's, they call them soft skills and, 21st century skills. And we think that the caring is a vital, fundamental skill. And that should be one of very much part of what is brought up in classrooms. And it's caring for self, for others, for the planet, and for the environment that everyone's talked about. So this is something that we have heard about from the other speakers, and is very much something that should come into classrooms. So what Edufy has done, next slide please, Thomas, is we've integrated all of these, and so we've got the global issues, we've got game-based learning, 21st century skills, project-based learning and design thinking, and incorporated in all of this is actually social and emotional learning. And what we've got is, in the next slide, is this playbook that actually refers to everything that you've heard of before, and a lot of the links to the organizations you've heard of before is also in that book. And yes, you will be able to get a recording of this session as well later on. So with I mentioned before that my focus was on neuroeducation, and a lot of it is based on what we do in Edufy projects is in neuroscience evidence. And the research shows that when kids are engaged, there's a certain part of their brain that actually, when they're playing games, there's a certain part of the brains that actually activated, and that makes acquiring information so much easier and retention of information as well. And also is a very positive effect on their social and emotional functions. So this is evidence, and in the playbook you've got more links to the research that pertains to that. And so what we are talking about, yes, next slide please, next, Thomas. So what we've got is, we found out that Minecraft is one of those games that is very engaging. And I'm going to play a very short video for about it, and it was by Benjamin Kelly, who's a STEM educator in Canada, and he's also a global Minecraft mentor. So he developed something called the SDG Shuffle. So yeah, I'll play it. Thanks, Thomas.
Welcome to the SDG Shuffle Village, in a world that's meant to be a companion to the SDG Shuffle Challenge cards. In this village, students will find homes dedicated to each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Because this village is a companion for the Sustainable Development Challenge cards, inside each hut there are 2 NPCs, one for Series 1 and the other for Series 2. So for instance, you would have Sustainable Development Goal number 6, and inside there would be a Series 1 NPC and a Series 2. Let's take a look inside one of these huts now. Inside we have 2 NPCs, one for Series 1 and Series 2. You can see they have the same objective as the challenge cards that your students will have. There's a link to a suggested build site. There's a Flipgrid share link if you want to share your solutions. There's some info about the SDGs, as well as some engaging and motivational video ideas under the idea links. In each of these huts, you'll be greeted by a Series 1 and Series 2 NPC. The student would choose the appropriate one and of course be whisked away to the build site that is favorable for their challenge. If you speak a language other than English, fear not. The reason that the objectives are also located inside these NPCs is the use of potentially immersive reader, where you can translate and also aid students who struggle with reading as well. So feel free to use the immersive reader button in the lower right of these NPCs. The village gathering location houses 2 robots. One is a resource bot giving extra resources about the Sustainable Development Goals, and the other is a guest book robot in case students wanted to share their first name and their country and simple information like that.
So as you can see, Minecraft education version is very, very useful in classrooms.
Welcome to the SDG Shuffle.
Yeah, it's very useful in classrooms, and that immersive reader just helps children who are not so good at reading to be able to listen to the instructions rather than have to read it, and also it gets translated into other languages. And the term NPC is non-playing character, and so these are static characters that are in the game that can act as guides or mentors, and really to give the information that the student needs in playing, going around their village and working out what needs to be done. So this is a very collaborative space as well for children to play in. But let's just hear from the children themselves as to what it is they like about it. So first we'll go to Amira, who's in South Africa. So Amira, if you're there, if you can just unmute yourself, and you can leave your video off if you don't want us to see you. So Amira.
Hello.
Hello. So Amira, what do you like about Minecraft? And would you like to see it in your school?
Yes, what I like about the game is that it's very creative, and you can decide about what you can do in the game. Like you can either be creative and creative and make your own things in survival. You can learn how to survive on your own and know how to use those things, your resources, right, in the right way. And
thank you, Amira. I'm sure you're looking a bit nervous, and you're doing really, really well. So thank you so much. And we'll pass it on to Diane. Maybe Diane, you can tell us what would you like to have Minecraft being used in your schools to teach you?
Yes.
And so what would you like to have it? So why do you think it would be something nice to do in schools?
You can teach the children how to be creative in class. You can learn them how to build stuff, so that way when they get to an older age, they can get good jobs, building, being a constructor.
Okay, you're talking about the coding within Minecraft, right? Which you need to do with a lot of things when you're in the Minecraft game.
Yes.
Right. You see, this is the thing. A lot of people don't know much about Minecraft, so we need to learn from you. And so thank you very much. And I'll now pass on to Valeria, who's in Peru. Valeria, if you want to turn your mic on.
Hi.
Hi, Valeria.
I answered the first question or the second first?
Both of them. So both questions.
The first is I like it because Minecraft is one of the few games that give almost total freedom to the player to choose how to play. You can choose the creative mode, for example, which is focused on creating things, whether they are structures, houses, or whatever the player decides to do. There is also the survival mode, in which you have nothing at the beginning and you have to get all the materials on your own from tools or to make it easier for you to get certain types of materials to minerals or others. In this mode, you can choose if your objective is to kill the dragon or just continue playing without killing the dragon. That is the
Okay.
player's choice.
Yeah. And what about in school? What do you think about in Minecraft in education? So how would that be used?
I believe it's more fun to learn something, in this case the SDG, through video games like Minecraft instead of a normal explanation. Another reason why I think it would be very useful is because most of the students are used to learn only from explanation or videos, but with video games it could be an innovative way which can capture more of their attention. Besides, we can collaborate among us.
Thanks, Valeria. See, so thank you. And this is so you've heard from the students, and you know, and that they are the ones that we are teaching. So and in the end, you know, if we want to engage them, we go where they are. So I know we're very close to running out of time, and so I suggest you read the playbook, and if you could just go to the end slide, please, Thomas. Yeah, so thanks everyone. We probably won't have too much. Yeah, so I'll just do a big thank you to everyone, to our inspiring experts today. Professor Amy Carter Mackenzie Knowles, Simran Mulchandani, Karishma Menon, Ben Owens, and our wonderful facilitator, Sukanya Narayan, our brilliant students, Valeria, Amira, and Diane, and to all of you who participated today. I just want to say that we are all interconnected. And this poem that I found reflects that. So it says, I'm not self-made, I'm community-made. I'm family-made, I'm land-made, I'm ancestor-made. I'm made of everything and everyone that made me exist outside just myself. So if we want to look after ourselves, we need to look after everything around us. And so please reach out to everyone who has been here today to find out more about their programs, and reach out to Edify as well. And everyone, please stay connected. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Asha, for getting us together.
Indeed. Thank you, Asha.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. Cheers.
Asha, if you're saying something, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I always do that. No, thank you so much. We had a bit of a rush at the end, but we did it. And thank you so much for being here. And you guys are absolutely inspiring. And listen to the kids. They want us to do this work. So and we'll do it for them. So thanks, everyone.